What does the month of February mean to you? Valentine's Day? Candlemas?
February 1st is the beginning of Celtic Spring.
And what does Celtic Spring and Celtic spirituality have to do with you and your life?
I'm David Denny,
I'm Tessa Bielecki.
and this is Fire and Light.
Conversations about life, love, and soul. Welcome, everyone. This is our first podcast of the new year after our January recess. And it's kind of like a new year, a new beginning, February 1st. In Ireland and other Celtic lands, February 1st is the beginning of Celtic spring.
Halfway between solstice and equinox, right?
That's right. I think the Celtic calendar makes a lot more sense than ours, actually. And during the monastic phase of my life, I lived at our Spiritual Life Institute monastery in Ireland, off and on for 10 years. And I loved February there. Snowdrops just covered the landscape, carpets and carpets of snowdrops. They're known as St. Bridget's flower because her feast day is also on February 1st. And Bridget is one of the three great saints of Ireland, along with St. Patrick and St. Columba. She has very high status in that whole culture.
Well, snowdrops are wonderful, but you also found it difficult living in Ireland, didn't you?
Yeah, I did have initially a very hard time there. I think I'm probably the only person on the planet who finds Ireland too green. Because I'm a desert person, I found it too green. I also found where we lived too tame. We were in green sheep pastures. As I love to say, I mean, to me, this sums up the whole difference in the spirit of living there for me and living in our other wild places in the Colorado mountains or the desert of Arizona. There's a big difference between a howling coyote and a bleeding sheep.
Yeah, but then you also discovered a way to thrive there, didn't you? And you came to love it.
I did come to love it. And I began to love it because I kept digging more and more deeply into Celtic spirituality, into Irish history, into Irish literature. I think it's amazing that Ireland is such a small country, an island country, and yet it has such a huge influence on world literature historically. It's amazing. So what I'd like to do with you, Dave, in the context of this podcast is talk about what are some of the major qualities in Celtic spirituality that all of you listeners could incorporate into your own lives to enrich your own contemplative experience. You know how I like to number things.
Yes, I do.
So number one is to dig deep. Don't live on the surface of life. Don't be superficial, but go deep in whatever ways you can.
You were inspired to do that, weren't you, by a poem by Seamus Heaney, the great Nobel Prize winning Irish poet.
And we actually got to meet Seamus Heaney.
We did.
In Ireland. Before we read the poem, Dave, tell the story of meeting Seamus Heaney.
Well, you're just saying how small Ireland is. There's like 4 million people on this island. I looked on a map once, did some comparing. I think Ireland is about a fourth the size of Colorado. So that just gives you a sense of the scale. So what struck me about it when I was there was it's more like a small town. And
the whole country's like a small town.
Yeah. So you could see Seamus Heaney. It's not like the United States where, Taylor Swift is surrounded by bodyguards and, you're never going to see her walking through your neighborhood. But we went to this place in Sligo, which was about a half hour from where we were living in Ireland, where he was giving a reading, and it was wonderful. And we even got to see him after he gave this reading. He's sitting there with his pint of Guinness.
Yes.
And we had a little chat, and he signed a book for us. The amazing thing is, I was editing our magazine called Desert Call at that time. And I said, well, gee, Mr. Heaney, could we print one of your poems? And he says, oh, yeah, sure. And I wish I could do an Irish accent.
Yeah.
And I said, well, do I need to call your publisher? No, it's okay. So we published one of his poems with his permission. And the way I got the permission was really cool, because I got home after being in Ireland, came back to Colorado. In the mail one day, I get a letter, a handwritten letter from Seamus Heaney, and he says, yeah, you can use the poem. And oh, by the way, I just heard about you guys on, was it TV or radio?
It was a TV show.
Yeah, it's a TV show. They did a little documentary on our Irish community, and he had just watched that. And he just says on the letter, wow, small world, huh?
Yeah.
And so then he signs it. And then it was like the next day or maybe 2 days later, I'm listening to NPR, and they announced the Nobel Prize for Literature was going to Seamus Heaney.
Yeah.
So it was pretty wonderful. This guy we had just met, like hanging out as pals. So
yeah. And he was so warm and friendly and chatty. And
yeah, our background was Carmelite, and he grew up with Carmelites, right?
That's right. Yes, he might have been educated by Carmelites. I can't quite remember. And of course, he's got that great, the Irish gift for gab and that lightheartedness, that sense of humor. He asked us if we wanted him to give our next retreat. And I wish that I'd had the wherewithal at the time to say yes, because can you imagine what it would have been like if we had had a retreat led by Seamus Heaney?
Yeah.
All he would have had to do is read his poetry and comment on it. And we didn't just print one poem of his, we kept doing that. So now this is the poem that really had a big effect on me. And let me just kind of introduce it before Dave reads it. Of course, he was born in a simple Irish family, and his father went out in the bog to dig peat for their fires. That's kind of an essential experience in Ireland, is to burn peat fires. Anyway, and it's very, for those of you who don't know about it, it's a bog. So it's squishy, very wet. It's almost kind of scary. It's like, oh my gosh, if I fall into this, what's going to happen? And the other amazing thing about it is that it's a big preservative. They have dug up butter that was preserved by the bog. They have dug up perfectly preserved skeletons. If you go to the National Museum in Dublin, you see kind of a prehistoric elk, huge elk, unbelievable antlers.
So it's like mummies, right? Mummified.
Well, the bog man in the museum was mummified. And then the elk is a gorgeous skeleton. So that, just so you know, that's kind of the context for this poem. Let's hear the poem, which is called Bogland.
We have no prairies to slice a big sun at evening. Everywhere the eye concedes to encroaching horizon. Our unfenced country is bog that keeps crusting. Butter sunk under more than 100 years was recovered salty and white. The ground itself is kind, black butter. Melting and opening underfoot, missing its last definition by millions of years. They'll never dig coal here. Only the waterlogged trunks of great firs, soft as pulp. Our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards. The bog holes might be Atlantic seepage. The wet center is bottomless.
And I know, Dave, you're the one who introduced me to this poem. So what are the Irish doing? What are the Celtic peoples doing as opposed to those of us in North America who have this huge, expansive land.
Yes, one of the things I noticed when I was there is you can't be on a square foot of Ireland without there being a poem or a story about it, because it's all been inhabited, and not just for a few hundred years, but it's been inhabited for, millions of years, it seems. I mean, there are ruins of people. They don't even know who these people were.
Yeah.
So that's that sense. Then what occurred to me, and what comes through, I think, in this poem, is the sense that instead of going out to a physical horizon or across an ocean, you go down into the depths of the bogs. You travel in time.
You travel in time, and again, you dig deep.
Yeah.
You go deep.
So there's a kind of a wilderness of imagination there, I think.
Yeah.
It has to do with going back in time.
Yeah, that's very well said. So, those lines, our pioneers keep striking inwards and downwards.
Mm-hmm.
And because I felt so confined in Ireland by the smallness, also by the weather, it forced me to go inwards and downwards. And that was how I immersed myself in Celtic spirituality. And I think that's a tremendous lesson from the Irish people and from this great spiritual tradition. Dig deep, go deep, like you dig the peat out of your bog.
And then, having dug deep, what would you say you came up with? What would be the next treasure you mined out of the bog there?
So the first thing is to dig deep. The second thing, if I were to sum up Celtic spirituality in just 2 words, the words I would use are ordinary plenty. I mean, if I were to spread it out more, I would say the celebration of the ordinary, but ordinary plenty. I just love this phrase.
Did you come up with that? Or?
Oh, no, not how I wish. It comes from another poet and another poem, Patrick Kavanagh, who's nowhere near as well known as Seamus Heaney and other poets. Our friend, Nora Tunney, who was the only Irish member of our community. And God bless Nora. We learned so much from her, and I can't keep telling all these stories. Nora just died last December 15th. So may she rest in peace, and I'm sure she is enjoying the extraordinary plenty that heaven is. When she was in school, in grammar school, they were assigned the memorization of one of Kavanagh's poems called Advent. And of course, all the Irish memorize all these poems. So, you go into a pub or you go to a celebration and everybody's got a poem to recite to you. But in that poem, Kavanagh's line is, life pours ordinary plenty. It pours ordinary plenty. I just love that. And it reminded me 50 years before reading this Kavanagh poem. Nora gave me a whole book of Kavanagh's poetry. Years ago, I had read, a rather remarkable book called The Supper of the Lamb. And the author, an Episcopal priest named Robert Farrar Capon, said this, and I have had this quote in front of me for decades. He said that we need to live festily, meaning celebratively, first of all, because life without special occasion is not worth living. But we also have to live ferially. That's kind of an esoteric word in Catholic spiritual circles, but it means ordinarily. So we have to live ordinarily to the ordinary stuff of every day, because life is more than occasions. And then here's his phrase, and the grand ordinariness must never go unsavored. So he says grand ordinariness, and Kavanagh says ordinary plenty. And I just love that, which also reminds me, one of my favorite Irish prayer poems, and it's about the kitchen. Remember that because the Irish culture, older Celtic culture, was a series of small tribes, small kingdoms, all under the leadership of a king, and their kings were like their friends or their family. So it's not like king today who's this rare creature set apart from the rest of the people living in a castle. The kings were
Comrades.
comrades. So just keep that in mind as you hear this little poem. Oh, my king, who can do all things, bless, oh God, my kitchen. And see, what the Irish then did very easily was transfer that sense of their leader as king to God as king. And then the poem goes on, my kitchen, the kitchen of God, a kitchen which my king has blessed, a kitchen that has butter. Mary's son, my friend, not my Lord, my friend, come to bless my kitchen. The Prince of the world, may we have abundance in him. So, again, this sense of the ordinary, the plenty, the grandeur that we experience in the ordinary.
And it's beautiful that it goes back so many centuries. And we don't even know who wrote these things, like what you just read, right?
Yeah, I think it's fascinating that so many of the older poems, when you see them in anthologies of Irish poetry, they merely say traditional or attributed to St. Columba, for example, because I'm going to read a poem by Columba in a minute. Which brings us, both this little prayer poem and Seamus Heaney, brings us to another important aspect of Celtic spirituality, which is the value of poetry, the importance of poetry. Celtic spirituality is a bardic tradition. Ireland was full of bards who were songwriters, singers, poets. They also used to recite genealogies or stories of great battles. And again, this is interesting, really interesting. Part of the English attempt to suppress the spirit of the Irish people was that the bards were banned because the English knew the importance of poetry, the importance of song and story, and that the bards had the power to not only inspire people, but rouse people up and perhaps lead them to revolt or rebellion. Before I read one of these more traditional poems, what do you have to say about, Dave, the importance of poetry?
We don't talk about it much in the United States. It doesn't seem to me in general. We're not that keen on it. But I think we're starting to see a lot more interest in the mainstream. You have people like Mary Oliver. It's a name lots of people have heard, and they love her poetry. And I think part of what makes it important to me is that even on the level of the brain, it really fires up both sides of the brain. And, what I think about human life is mostly knowing and loving. And that's what seems to happen when people read poetry and write poetry. It's a way of both knowing the world more deeply and loving the world more deeply. And when you put those two things together, it's very powerful, like those Irish bards who really moved people's minds and hearts because it was both intelligent and not just mentally intelligent, but emotionally intelligent.
Emotionally
And I
intelligent.
think literature and the arts in general, what they do is wonderful because it expands our sense of what it might feel like to be someone else. And I think our culture is so individualistic. I'd rather not know what you feel like. I don't want to know what you think. I know what I think, and I don't want you to mess with me. It's kind of, that isolationist individualism. Whereas what the arts do is say, here's what it feels like to be enslaved in Alabama in 1840. Here's what my great-great-grandmother felt like. That's just unimaginable to me as this, young white privileged kid from Kokomo, Indiana. So the world gets big. It
Big.
opens
Yeah.
out. And I think that's a key to a healthy society too, because as we know right now, we're busted up into factions, and I don't want to know about you. I don't want to hear about you. I don't want to hear from you. I just want to make sure my tribe wins and yours loses. So that's not a healthy way, I don't think, for us to be living. That's why I'm a big proponent of the arts and poetry, because they can take us through time. They can take us across borders. Suddenly you could read a poem and learn what it felt like to be a Serbian or a Bosnian when they were fighting each other. And one thought the other was a monster. And suddenly you realize, no, they were sons, they were daughters, they were friends, they were lovers. And your heart goes out.
Yeah.
And then there's hope.
And then there's hope. So it's revolutionary because it builds community.
Mm-hmm.
And so
Yeah.
that's gorgeous.
I think I remember reading recently about how many Americans get very uncomfortable when they hear another language. And I was saddened by that, because that's what the arts are doing. They're teaching us other languages that are beautiful. And no one language is going to tell us all the truth. And so poets help bridge those gaps.
So here is one of those traditional Irish poems, and it's from the 12th century, and it's one of those that says attributed to Saint Columba, who lived on an island, in a hermitage on an island. And talk about ordinary plenty. You're going to hear him talk about the ordinary plenty of the island, the rocks, the ocean, the birds, the whales, his books, the seaweed that he picks for food, the fish that he fishes, as well as his solitude, his meditation, and his labor. Here it is. Delightful I think it to be in the bosom of an island, on the peak of a rock, that I might often see there the calm of the sea, that I might see its heavy waves over the glittering ocean as they chant a melody to their Father on their eternal course, that I might see its smooth strands, no gloomy things, that I might hear the voice of the wondrous birds, that I might hear the sound of the shallow waves, the noise of the sea, that I might see its splendid flocks of birds over the full watered ocean, that I might see its mighty whales, greatest of wonders, that I might pore on one of my books, good for my soul, a while kneeling for beloved heaven, a while reciting psalms, a while gathering seaweed from the rocks, a while fishing, a while giving good to the poor, a while in my cell alone, a while meditating on the kingdom of heaven, a while at labor, not too heavy, it would be delightful. So that's Saint Columba, and that, I think this poem illustrates another aspect of Celtic spirituality besides the ordinary plenty. I would call this our number 4 lesson, and that is to find your island. And by that I mean enjoy being alone. You don't have to go and find a literal island. It can be a corner of your house. It can be a pocket of time in the middle of the night, and value solitude.
I love the paradox in that poem. He's all alone. He's in solitude. He's loving that, but it's putting him in connection with all the creatures around him.
Yeah.
And he's really seeing and savoring everything around him. I love that.
Yeah, he sure is.
People can learn more about all this from something you did recently on the web, right? You had a webinar with Kelly Deutsch.
I did a whole Zoom class on Celtic spirituality for a group called Spiritual Wanderlust, and you can either find that class on the spiritualwanderlust.com site, or you can go to tessabielecki.com, and I'm going to post the link there.
Great. So, what's your number 5? If you asked me, I would say it'd be living a life of personal, passionate presence. That's a phrase we used a lot back in the monastery. And that sure seems to come through in all the poetry that you've read. And what we see in Celtic spirituality, there's always this sense of the divine everywhere in every aspect, as you were saying earlier, in the very ordinary.
Yeah.
And I think you sometimes get that idea that spirituality might be about some other world. And what's beautiful about the Celtic tradition is that it's very this worldly.
Now you've got another little poem that
Yes,
illustrates this sense of the presence of God in all creation.
this is a little poem that refers to the three. And of course, in Irish spirituality, the three would be the Trinity. And I think for most people, one way to look at that is thinking about the sacred as a source from which everything comes, thinking about the sacred as the beauty of an individual being that we were just talking about, for example, the whale or the seaweed. And then the third way we might think about God or the sacred is in relationships, that it's not just this or that, but it's the quality of love, the quality of compassion between people. We might say the kingdom of God is between us.
Yeah, so
those are the three ways maybe you could think of it instead of this.
Yes, so we're not just talking about Father, Son, and Holy Spirit.
No.
In Christian lingo, there's a deeper way to look at this. But of course, this tradition is going to use some of that Christian language. So let's hear this one.
The three who are over me, the three who are below me, the three who are above me here, the three who are above me yonder, the three who are in the earth, the three who are in the air, the three who are in the heaven, the three who are in the great pouring sea.
Intimate connection with all of creation all the time in this tradition. So then that leads us to our meditation for today. We're going to do some Celtic prayers from the Outer Hebrides Islands in Scotland, and that's where some of these other prayer poems that we've been using come from. The first one is going to immerse us in the presence of the divine within all our senses, and then the second one is the presence of God in every human action that we take, the ordinary plenty of finding the divine in creation within our own senses, our own bodies, and with our ordinary, everyday human activities. So, Dave, put us in the proper spirit to make us personally, passionately present here and now.
Find a comfortable position to be in. Usually it's sitting up straight. Position in which you can breathe easily and take a couple of deep breaths. And you can let go of the past and the future and find yourself right here in this moment with all your senses receptive and still, and listen.
Bless to me, O God, each thing mine eye sees.
Bless to me, O God, each sound mine ear hears.
Bless to me, O God, each scent that goes to my nostrils.
Bless to me, O God, each taste that goes to my lips.
Each note that goes to my song, each ray that guides my way.
Each thing that I pursue, each lure that tempts my will.
The zeal that seeks my living soul, the three that seek my heart.
The zeal that seeks my living soul, the three that seek my heart.
God to enfold me, God to surround me.
God in my speaking, God in my thinking.
God in my sleeping, God in my waking.
God in my watching, God in my hoping.
God in my life, God in my lips.
God in my soul, God in my heart.
God in my sufficing, God in my slumber.
God in mine ever-living soul, God in mine eternity.
Amen.
Amen.
Thank you for listening.
We hope you'll share this podcast with your friends.
And if you want to explore these themes more deeply, check out our websites, tessabielecki.com
And sandandsky.org. You've been listening to Fire and Light.
Conversations about life, love, and soul.
The background music for Fire and Light is The Day We Met, composed and performed by Ricky Zhao.
Fire and Light's theme music is Dreamcatcher, composed and performed by Chris Martin and Jeff Harvey at Purple Planet Music.
Fire and Light is recorded in Tucson, Arizona, editing by David Levin.